back to another episode of Hawk Off the Press. My name is Madison Hricik. I am the Iowa football beat reporter for the Gazette. And I'm not the only one anymore, ladies and gentlemen. We have a very exciting guest. I get to say this with a lot of excitement. I finally got my voice back after going to a concert over the weekend, so I could talk like a normal person a little bit more. But I'm so excited to introduce to you guys Jack Knowlton. He works at the Southeast Iowa Union, which is part of the Gazette. And he's going to be helping me out throughout this season for football. Jack, welcome to the beat. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm very excited to be a part of things, especially, I'm a sucker for podcasts. So once I heard there was one, I had to put my foot in the door because I like to talk. So I was excited to hear about this element, especially.
You saying you like podcasts is a little bit of an understatement given our precursor conversation to us starting to record with the two of us just sitting and catching up for a little while. But no, I'm super excited to have you on. Jack will be with me through all of the Iowa football home games, except the first one. He's got a family trip planned. Beyond that, he'll be with us throughout the season. He'll be with us during the podcast episodes as we get ready for the football season coming up in a matter of weeks. I don't know where this summer has gone. But Jack, let's before we get into football and Iowa football at that, let's talk about you a little bit. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you landed in Iowa.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, I studied journalism in college. Went to the University of Missouri. I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So lived there. Went to Mizzou for school. My first job out of college, I actually went down. I stayed in SEC country. I covered Alabama for 2 years. Down for their rivals affiliate, which is, of course, now since absorbed by On3, but worked down there for a couple of years. And then I actually came up to Iowa by way of another colleague of ours in the Gazette, Peter Camp. Shout out to him. Him and I went to school together. He told me about an opportunity at the Southeast Iowa Union. I came up there for that that was April of 2025, and ended up becoming one of their two prep sports writers. So that is what I'm currently doing on top of now helping out with football. So that's my, kind of full circle journey back. I've done like a horseshoe, I guess, of the country. I've gone down south and now I'm back up closer to where I grew up and back in the Midwest. But so I'm just coming up on a year now with the Union, been covering preps down here. So I've gotten a very good gauge and familiarity with the preps, football scene. And now I'm diving into the deep end with Iowa. So it's been a lot of fun. I'm very excited to be back. Covering college sports is a lot of fun. Like I said, I did that with Alabama and was at some really cool stuff and got to write some really fun pieces. And so I'm excited to be back in the college universe a little bit too.
A slightly different version of the college universe with Big Ten versus SEC.
Yes.
We can joke about that all we want. Both of us having SEC football experiences in our past. But I mean, I think the big thing that is intriguing about having you join us and providing this new perspective is the fact that, you cover one of your primary roles is covering prep football down in the Southeast Iowa Union area. It's a little further south of where Cedar Rapids and Iowa City is, but you do get a lot of opportunities to see potential Hawkeye recruits. You see opportunities to see Hawkeye commits. A lot of other schools from the Big Ten and across the country are scouting players from down there. But I mean, what have you liked about the prep football season, and how does that help you to rejoin the college football sphere?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I said, I joined in August of last year. So a lot of the beginning of football season was just me like making sure I knew where I was going and like was in the right spot. My first couple
you and me both.
Yes. But honestly, with the prep scene in particular, like the community aspect of it is just so fun. Like these places in these towns truly gear up for Friday night. Like it is all everyone is talking about all week. And just the investment in it from like the kids on the team to the entire town is a lot of fun to cover. That passion is just kind of unmatched really. And like, especially in this state where there are no pro sports teams, like apart from Iowa, or Iowa State, I guess, depending on your affiliation, high school is next up. And so your local team is like, that element is really fun to cover and to talk to people and hear how excited they are. And yeah, I mean, it's different. Like we have, a team in Fairfield is one of the teams we cover. And like they run, I give their coach grief because they run, the T formation and you can hardly tell who has the ball half the time. It makes it hard to take pictures. We of course have, 8-man football. I've been talking Maddie's ear off about Cam Buffington, who came from our area in Winfield, Mount Union. that's like super fun to cover. I actually haven't gotten a chance yet to get to an 8-man game. I didn't in my first season. I am making a point of doing that,
As
and
you
like
should.
that on the ground this year. So it's just kind of, the different way they play the game, the way they figure things out with obviously almost every school that I cover, kids play both ways because they have to with roster numbers and things like that. And yeah, I mean, part of that is fun is seeing a, young freshman or sophomore and maybe being like, okay, let's see how this kid, kind of grows. And then they become this super big sensation. And you've watched them literally from day one, at a certain time. It's not a football example, but like, spending some time, like for Washington has a guy in track named Grayson Hartman, who now is like one of the best throwers in the state. It's pretty wild to see him come from a town of 7,500 people. Like, I really enjoy those stories. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And it'll be fun to watch Iowa and then go to a prep game the next week and maybe see like, all right, who could get to that? Who could reach that level?
Mhm.
Maybe play on Saturdays. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And for some context for the viewers and readers here, where Jack is going to be an extremely important piece of this coverage for the Gazette is he's not only going to be helping tell some stories during games and helping with the social media presence and doing this podcast and interacting with you guys, but he's got that boots on the ground experience because of the prep side of things as well. So one of the things I'm very excited about looking forward to working in with is one of my points this season, as you mentioned, you're making it a point to go to an 8-man game. I'm making it a point to go to a couple high school games in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area as well, to keep an eye and step up some of the recruiting coverage as well, especially with how important local recruits are to this program. So it's something that I know both of us are excited about as we get ready for actual football season, which let's talk about Iowa football now. We've got the pleasantries out of the way, I feel like. Let's talk a little bit about Iowa football. Jack, what have been your impressions of Iowa football, maybe as a program or the expectations heading into the season from what you've been able to learn since we brought you onto the team?
Yeah, I mean, watching from an outside perspective, having kind of the same thoughts as I think most people who don't watch Iowa all the time have about Iowa, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. I'm really intrigued to follow an Iowa team that doesn't know necessarily who its starting quarterback is going to be for the entire season and have that battle. I mean, I think that's kind of the number one thing for maybe everyone's looking at. So maybe that's a little bit of a cop out answer, but Jeremy Hecklinski, Hank Brown, like just getting to that. I'm eager to get to that first game, see what the snap counts look like, how they're going to be splitting time. You've got the stuff coming up this weekend where you're going to see, maybe who's involved more there. And, there's nothing like off-season overreactions, right? And hearing things through the grapevine and speculating, that's what this time is for. But I think, seeing a veteran coach like Kirk Ferentz, how he deals with a true QB battle and with a QB battle around some really good, skill position players. Like, I think, you want to get that figured out pretty quickly because there's some guys that whoever's throwing them the football can really make something happen and do some damage. So you want to figure that out and get more of an offensive presence. I won't lie, like seeing your leading receiver from a season ago in Vanami with less than 500 yards and only the 3 touchdowns. Like, I'm wondering if someone can maybe, whether it's him or somebody else, maybe take that leading receiver role by the scruff of the neck a little bit more and become a go-to guy. I'm very intrigued to see how quickly the QB battle gets kind of wrapped up, for lack of a better term, and then how they use some of these skill guys that seem to be having the potential for some breakout seasons.
Yeah, there's a lot of players that have a lot of expectations on them, and there's also some question marks with a lot of those same players and also different players as well. Kid Day is on Saturday. That's going to be at Kinnick Stadium. That starts 11 a.m. if I am looking at things correctly. Yes, 11 a.m. Excuse me. And it's free, and it is free for everybody to be able to go and see. They're going to be doing autograph signing beforehand. And then we'll also have an opportunity to go and see what this team looks like. It's going to be a little bit like the open spring practice back in April. And it is also going to be the one and only time that we as a collective really get to see this Iowa team before the season starts. So it's going to be super important. As you mentioned, the preseason reactions are definitely going to be heightened because this is really our only shot that we're going to see this team before September 5th. I'm certainly interested in the snap count number. I'm with you there between the two quarterbacks. That's something I know I will be focusing on for sure. Between that and the defensive line are going to be my two position groups I'm really going to be focused on. One I will say though it's been on the back of my mind. I think I'm less quote unquote worried. I say worried in air quotes about it because it's a position group that I don't think any fan is worried about. But I am intrigued to see what the offensive line is going to look like, knowing Cale Winters has had a lot of positive reviews and could really easily take over that center position and have Peeper stay at guard rather than shifting to center. That will be very intriguing. So let's ask another question for Jack here. We're going to look at the schedule. I know that you're not going to be there for the Northern Illinois game since you're going to be traveling. But of the home games, I'm going to ask home games specifically. Which home game are you looking forward to covering the most and why?
I mean, again, I don't want to cop out again and say the Cyhawk game. And so for context too, I have never been to Kinnick Stadium. That Cyhawk game will be the first time I set foot in that building. So I'm excited to see the atmosphere. And, obviously I've seen it on TV and heard a ton about it. So I think that's kind of a fun first game to cover. I honestly, and I know of course about the rivalry with Nebraska, that coming at the end of the year. 11 a.m. kickoffs, I feel like can be kind of, I shouldn't say that, they can be kind of dicey when it's not an opponent that's a rival with the, the fans. I feel like that can be a little bit, I'm a big fan of night games if you're talking about fan atmosphere. And I know it's TBD right now, especially if Iowa can knock off Michigan on the road and you go into that Ohio State game. I think that's the one I probably have circled the most. If there's a 4-0, versus 4-0 situation there, it's at home. I have to imagine Kinnick is going to be absolutely rocking for that one. I think it's a little context dependent, but I'll say Ohio State with Cyhawk being like, not wanting to defer to that one because I am excited to see that rivalry.
No, I think that's very fair. I think both of those are very solid answers. I remember being very excited for my first Cyhawk game last season, and it was in Ames. I'm very excited to see what the Cyhawk rivalry looks like in Kinnick this year. That is the benefit of year two, is I'm like, okay, I get the flip side of a lot of these rivalry games now. So we'll get to go to Minnesota, host Wisconsin, host Nebraska. So that stuff will be a lot of fun. I'm still leaning towards, like, as much as I'm not a morning person. So the 6:30 or 6:45 a.m. alarm for an 11 a.m. kick is not going to be my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah.
But I am really excited to see this Nebraska game at home. Who knows what this season will look like at that point, where Iowa will stand, where Nebraska will stand. That's so far out in the future right now. But I really did enjoy experiencing that rivalry game in Lincoln last year. And so I'm excited to see that one. It's also senior day with a relatively small senior class. So that will be fun too. And I have heard so many stories about a cold November game in Kinnick. It always seems to come back to a specific Nebraska game where it was extremely cold. So I don't know. It almost kind of feels like I feel like I haven't lived a Midwestern Iowa football season until I've got a really cold Iowa Nebraska game to cover.
I was trying to think too, like looking at the dates when it's going to truly turn to like football weather, because it feels like it gets harder and harder to predict, like whether we have warmer falls or whatever. And so maybe that October 3rd date will be too soon. But yeah, definitely, you do get that when it's that chill in there. There's something like special about it. Maybe you think about that. It feels more special when it's the summer and it's humid and hot all the time, and then you get 3 weeks into the chill fall and you're like, I'm sick of this. But when you have football in the mix to distract you, it's definitely fun. I wanted to throw a question your way, actually, going back to the roster briefly. And, when I was writing, I wrote, a story for the Gazette, just like looking at 5 players to watch during training camp and examining particularly the transfers. And, I know this has been talked about, but I'm curious your take on it, maybe what the fan base's pulse has been. Not a lot of Power 5 or even high major, and I know that's more of a basketball term, and sometimes my brain defers to that, but or FBS.
We know what you mean. Yeah.
Not a lot of like Power 5 FBS transfers, but some like enticing names nonetheless. And some of these guys are going to have big roles, and of course, like someone like Tyler Brown from JMU, right, played in the college football playoff, so he's gotten as close to the Power 5 level as you can get without being there. But what is your take on how they kind of approached the portal with like really taking some swings? I just haven't really seen too much like that where a team almost exclusively recruits in FCS and non-power five, trying to find some gems there.
Well, I think it's twofold. For one, it's not that Iowa didn't try and go for some maybe power four transfer players. Some of it wasn't the right fit. Some of it is they also wanted some developmental players. Basically, all but one of these players that came in from the transfer portal have multiple years of experience, not experience, eligibility available for Iowa. So it goes back to a lot of the developmental side that the program really likes to focus on. And so that's where you see players. That's where you see some of these players that have transferred in, and they can really take a step forward. Maybe they're not starting every single game this coming season. It might be in 2027 where we see them really take on a starting or a leadership role in that capacity. Not to say that they can't all do that this year. I mean, you look at a guy like Anthony Hawkins coming in from Villanova. He's somebody that has been making waves from defensive coordinator Phil Parker. It's a player to kind of watch. We'll be keeping an eye on him on Saturday. But he's somebody that, he comes from a program in the FCS side of things where maybe I don't want to sit here and say like they're not as good, but sometimes it's a little bit more of a hidden gem situation for a lot of these players that play FCS football and they get their opportunity. I mean, we saw last year with Mark Gronowski how easy it can be for the right player to transition from, the FCS to FBS, and that there, in some cases, there really isn't a ton of transition. It's more of the speed and the prowess and the physicality of the game. And if you have enough time to make that transition leading up to the season, you can make that happen a lot better. So I sit here and say this coming from somebody who started out at an FCS program at James Madison and seeing that program make the transition to FBS, and then obviously what they did last year. I come from the perspective of if your program has the ability to bring in these players and develop them, they can still fit the system, even though sometimes the instant gratification might be a little bit more of that like louder itch in the back of your brain. I hope you understand what I'm getting at when I say
Yeah.
this.
No, it makes sense. I think it's just, I mean, especially like when you have a coach like Kirk Ferentz, where I think a lot of these guys, can trust that he's going to deliver for them, trust that he's going to develop. I mean, he's done it for so long, and like the culture and the program he has established at Iowa is so strong. Like, you have to get the most out of those, or you probably trust him to get the most out of some of those guys in terms of identifying talent. It's just a very interesting kind of general approach to things, and like good for them in terms of if a lot of these guys can hit in their first seasons, especially, or even be long-term pieces. Like, you have to find ways to be successful in this sport now that are different from what everyone else is doing, because if you can't throw a giant bag of money at the top transfer, you're not going to get them. So
Right.
it's a little bit, you have to figure out your way of recruiting, your way of sort of standing out in this kind of weird Wild West world nowadays. And but it'll be interesting, like you mentioned, the safeties, obviously, that there were a couple good players in that spot in those roles last year that kind of have to get filled. I mean, speaking of JMU, I'm excited for Tyler Brown. Doing some research on him, I put him in my 5 players. He seems like someone who can take that jump, and he played in the college football playoff last year. Something you can't take away.
One thing I will say about Tyler Brown that was really interesting, I had the chance to speak to now UCLA head coach Bob Chesney. He was the head coach at James Madison. We chatted for a little while when I was in Chicago for Big Ten Media Days about Tyler Brown, because he recruited Tyler Brown at Holy Cross and then eventually James Madison, and wanted to be able to bring him to UCLA before Tyler Brown decided he wanted to play for Iowa. And one of the things that Chesney was really adamant about was just not only his ability and his sight on the field and his ability to read the field well, but just his quickness and his instincts were something that he really hyped up quite a bit. You could tell that Chesney was kind of hoping that Tyler would follow him to Los Angeles, and he even said, he's like, I wish we still had him on our team. But it's somebody that, I think Chesney developed a very personal relationship with. He even said, that Iowa fans, it's a player that they're going to really come to love and adore at Kinnick Stadium. So high praise from his former coach, James Madison, now at UCLA. So I definitely think he's somebody that can be an impact player. He's somebody Phil Parker said has developed really nicely throughout the spring and part of summer workouts. And he's going to be in a very mature defensive back room, especially when you include Zach Lutmer, Deshaun Lee, like so many returning faces that have experience into the mix as well. Jalen Watson's another one that comes to mind. So there's certainly some capabilities for that. I have a question for you, Jack, while we're going back and forth here.
Okay.
Let's stick with quarterbacks. What do you think either Hank Brown or Jeremy Heklinski need to prove either on Saturday for Kids Day or by the start of this season on September 5th for either one of them to win the job at this?
It's a good question. What do they need? What do they need to prove? I think, it's. I always think it's interesting, like with players in general, and obviously especially with quarterbacks. The way, especially unprompted, that some of their teammates talk about them. So when I talk about like this time where you're not getting as where you're getting more limited access to actually seeing them play. Like I'm intrigued by when you ask other guys like in the offense what they're saying about them, and I think like to see one of them go and grab that leadership role. Now I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Heklinski's part of that leadership council, right? Is he on that this year?
I believe so. I believe so. I'm double checking right now just to make sure we have that correct. But
so I think
I remember that conversation. Yes.
I think that's one thing. I do think that's important, as maybe again cliche as it sounds. But I think just establishing, their game and their rhythm early. I mean, Hank Brown, coming over from Auburn, he's thrown like 50 passes in the 2 seasons, that I'm looking at here, and just like really hasn't had much of a chance to assert himself. So I think like, showing that they can come out with your right away, even against a team like Northern Illinois, and just lead the offense down the field, be that presence, like show that you kind of have a mastery of it already, that you can go and kind of make the role your own, and just show some connection. I think like, from an on-field standpoint, obviously, if you can find receivers at all 3 levels down the field, like, again, that sounds really basic, but being able to have demonstrated an understanding of who your skill guys are, how you can utilize them, getting them into space, getting them in positions to succeed. Like, I think the guy that demonstrates that out the gate, that's one thing that I think, again, when you roll the teams out there, the guy who's been doing that in practice and in this time that's going to show right away. So I think like just seeing which one of them wants to go out and take it quicker. And like Brown is a guy that really intrigues me because, again, like this is his 4th season now. He has not really had that chance. He's been passed up a little bit, at a couple programs now, and we'll see how hungry he is for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to make sure, I just want to make sure that we had that right. Both quarterbacks are a part of that leadership council.
Oh, there
so Brown
you go.
and
Okay.
Heklinski are both a part of it. They both were named to it this year. They're 2 of the 17 that were named back in May about that. So I wanted to make sure I clarified that because I know I was 99% sure they both were on it, but I wanted to make sure we were 100%.
I knew it was like 16 names, so I couldn't remember every single one of them. But yeah, it was and not to overread into that, but I think that does matter. And like I said, just with players in general, that's a big thing I look for is like when you're asking, unrelated questions and people go out of their way to mention a teammate in a specific answer, like that kind of stuff matters to me in terms of like, okay, unprompted, you talked about this guy. He clearly is doing something right. Like trying to read between those lines there, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we've definitely seen, especially throughout the summer, is just as much as we've been trying to ask about the quarterbacks and their personalities, how they are on the field, how they are off the field, what the coaching staff is looking for. It sounds like the 2 of them not only have been focusing on individual elements to improve their game on the field, but there has been a lot of effort to make sure that they're getting in the reps with individual players outside of practice when they can, making sure they're trying to develop those relationships with the receivers, the running backs, the line, the tight ends, that entire group. Because of the fact that, at some point the coaching staff will have to make a decision, and when the decision comes, the rest of the team has to be ready to, I don't want to say adjust because they've been playing with each other, but at the same time, you have to make the mental switch to whichever quarterback is the one under center. So it is an intriguing element for sure.
Yeah, and I mean with a rivalry game and an important matchup week 2, like again, it's going to get decided. There's no time to. It's not like you play Northern Illinois and then Northern Iowa and somebody else. You can't build it up for 3 weeks. It's whoever's trotting out there for this Cyhawk game is your guy, and hopefully, like, or at least that's who it should be for the rest of the season, unless things take a turn, which does happen. But yeah, I'm intrigued. I'm curious too. I admittedly haven't studied both of them a ton in terms of their style, but obviously, Gronowski 16 touchdowns on the ground, like, which one, if either one of them can establish themselves as a runner and make that a part of their game, or if maybe Iowa's going to completely go the other direction and just use them more as pocket passers. But whether or not they do that, both these guys are unproven as runners, and maybe it's a style change for the team, or if they want to be a running quarterback, both of them still have to prove it. They haven't shown it really on the field yet in their limited chances.
Yeah, I think that's one element of this preseason and even this open practice, frankly, and for Kids Day, that I'm intrigued with, is that we've talked a lot about how Gronowski was basically like another running back for this team. Like, he was the quarterback, but he essentially was a running back for all intents and purposes throughout most of the year, and that's where he was most effective. I think that definitely unlocked some potential for Iowa's quarterbacks moving forward. It's a matter of, you can't clone Gronowski, and he's not coming back either. And so that's the tough part right now, is that there's not really a chance, like, you can't immediately replicate that. You have to take what Brown and what Hecklinski are both good at and develop it. Now, I will say, offensive coordinator Tim Lester has mentioned before that, Hecklinski can run, he can scramble a little bit. He's got a little bit of that mobility kind of built into him. Brown can, like, I guess a lot of people would consider Brown as the more quote unquote again, air quotes, but stereotypical Iowa quarterback, just in terms of stature, the ability to throw the ball, things like that. But Lester has said he can move and he can vacate the pocket successfully as well. So there is an element to mobility. It's not going to be the same as what they did with Gronowski last year. I don't think that, I think that just worked out wonderfully in Iowa's favor. It's a matter of, can they take what they learned with a quarterback like Gronowski and potentially apply it and use it as a future strength for Brown or Hecklinski or potential future Iowa starting quarterbacks down the line, because the run game is still extremely important to Iowa football and will always be important to Iowa football. And that certainly unlocked a new level potential for Iowa football moving forward. So, not a bad question to ask by any means. I think it's something that is an element to this quarterback battle. However, I think there's a little bit more of a focus on who is it going to be right now, which I think we're all anxiously waiting to see when that decision will be made, whether it's, on Saturday or September 3rd or September, we'll find out. But it's the hope, and I think what Kirk Ferentz has really kind of said throughout media day and preseason, is that the sooner the quarterbacks could potentially separate themselves to make a decision easier, the better. But he has seen a quarterback battle bleed into the start of a season before.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There's the whole, like, I think of that quote with, Hecklinski is a runner, and my thought is just like, there's always layers to that, right? Like, it's okay, he can move around a little bit. Does that mean, you can run and scramble for 16 touchdowns, or is it more, all right, he can, evade the first pass rusher and get out of the pocket and make something happen a little bit. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see, no matter who it is, if it's Hank Brown and it's someone who's more of a traditional pocket passer, how Iowa's game looks different to last year, or if one of them can, figure that part of their game out a little bit. What happens there? So.
Yeah, I have another question for you, Jack. Let's look at. I don't want to say let's go into hot takes, because I feel like that's a very button word.
Yeah.
But for all intensive purposes, it's August 12th. Let's make some predictions that we can laugh at in about 4 months. But we'll start with something maybe a little bit more overarching. What are you most intrigued about when it comes to learning this team as you continue starting to kind of dive into the X's and O's of Iowa football, and what we all collectively will discover about this particular team as the season goes on?
There's a couple things, like you mentioned the defensive line. Like, I'm glad you're focusing on that, because I'm excited to read about it in terms of, you've got some young guys, some transfers coming into there. How do they, kind of establish that identity? Same thing on the other side of the ball. Like, it feels like Iowa can automatically replace an offensive line every single year, but you have some starters leaving, and you have to get some new blood in there. Like, can those guys get embedded? But in terms of, gosh, you used the word hot take, and now I want to say something like way out of left field.
You can if you choose to, but I don't want to use that as like the buzzer word more so.
I really trust this team, like you said about, yeah, I think we even talked about it before we started recording, the solidity of the running game. I want to see just how explosive some of these skill guys can be. I was really intrigued by DJ Vanami's story. I mean, going from walk on to what he did last year is obviously extremely exciting. And then to get Ostrenga back on top of that, with what happened with him last year and just the unfortunate luck and then the breakout of another player, I feel like this day and age, you see those guys maybe out the door and trying to find an opportunity elsewhere. But that makes for a really enticing tight end room. And I think I'm hoping that if this quarterback, whoever it is, can get established, how do you use a guy like that? How do you use sort of an interesting transfer, a guy like Tony Diaz? How explosive can he be? I heard the quote from Kirk Ferentz say, we almost have to save him from himself at times. He's like a golden retriever. He wants to go chase the ball all the time. How does a team like Iowa, so known for, just playing solid football, winning games with defense, winning games with not a lot of scoring, can there be this kind of lightning rod player out on the outside that can establish themselves and just take over that role and have, I'm not saying like a 1,100 yard receiving season in somebody, but can you have maybe a nice diverse cast of skill guys that make their passing game a significant threat if one of these quarterbacks can get established? I think that's what I'm kind of holding out hope for, because I think there's some guys in the room based on my brief research, albeit that are there.
Yeah, I think it's a valid question. I think that Tony Diaz is somebody that people put a lot of stock in over the last few months, especially this is somebody that canceled a visit with Alabama to commit to Iowa as a wide receiver. 5 years ago, that would have blown so many people's minds. Frankly, I think I was pretty shocked too, more so just because with the transfer portal, I always try to say, well, they could commit at any point, but they usually want to see all the schools first. So him canceling a visit was kind of a surprise to me. But I think, as I've told you before, as I've told a lot of people, I've said it on this podcast before, I am cautiously optimistic in this wide receiver room. I think there is a lot of opportunity for people to be very excited about this wide receiver room. I also am of the belief of, I will believe it when I see it. I think Tony Diaz is somebody with an exorbitant amount of potential. I mean, we haven't seen him on the field yet. He wasn't available during the open spring practice back in April. We have some clips of film from him from when he was at UT RGV. But outside of that, we don't have a ton. He's put on some muscle, he said. And he's somebody that a lot of these players are big on too. I just am of the belief that I will believe it when I see it. Let me see this guy play. I want to see all these positive things that people are saying when the lights are bright, when Kinnick is full, things like that. I also think that one person doesn't make an entire position group. I think Reese Vanderzee has a lot to prove this season, especially if he can stay healthy. I think that the two of them alone will be really, really good for this team this year. I'm also, just excited to see what this tight end room is going to look like in general. Another wide receiver I haven't mentioned yet, Jerriett Bowie. He dealt with an injury all last year. We didn't see him at any point. He's come back with a pretty good spring. He's somebody that's kind of flown under the radar in terms of a lot of just conversations throughout the summer, but he's somebody I'll be interested in. And then, of course, KJ Parker, who had a really nice performance during the spring practice, just to kind of finish off the wide receivers I was rattling off there. But, that passing game is going to be so intriguing. I think, I believe David Eichel from 247 said it with us last week. If Iowa can have a receiver with 400-500 yards, I consider that a pretty good marker. I'm not expecting somebody to go out and have a 300-yard game at any point this year. But I think if you prove that you can take a step forward, then I think they're trending in the right direction. I'm not anticipating a major turnaround. I'm expecting a step forward. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Vanderzee was someone I think that's just what you do in this era of transfers. When you have a transfer starter next to someone, you're like, all right, let's talk about them and speculate how they're going to be. But it almost makes you take a guy like him for granted, where he could just take another leap and be, that guy as well. So yeah. And again, it's also quarterback dependent, of course, with how good that, that room is going to be. I wanted to ask you, unless you have more questions.
No, let's go. Keep going.
What is your take on this team's linebacker room? Because it seems like, I've heard so much about Jaden Montgomery. There were obviously a bunch of seniors in it last year that you do have to replace. But When you look at maybe the Big Ten in general, where does this linebacker room maybe stand for you? Because it seems like there's still a pretty good amount of talent back. It seems a lot is expected of Montgomery in terms of being another leap guy. Van Kinkerix has had some consistency. I've of course, even last year when I started with the Union, paid close attention to Cam Buffington last year. Maybe our most viewed Twitter video was reposting the Minnesota interception. But what do you think of that room? Just maybe where it could stack up. Is it one of the better position groups on this team when you look at the rest of it, and maybe even within the conference as well?
I think the linebacker room is really intriguing because it's got a lot of talent in it and it's got a level of maturity in it, led by Jaden Montgomery. You're just seeing a lot of players that they haven't had 600 snaps of college football under their belt just yet. I mean, Montgomery took over the starting role linebacker halfway through the season last year. So this is technically the full first season with him with the comms headset on. So that's intriguing. You have players like Preston Reese, Cam Buffington that we've heard a lot about, that are going to be potentially important players. First year player. I don't know how much you'll see the field this year, but it's somebody that their name has been mentioned before. Kason Thomas, from Sioux City, Iowa. He's somebody that I've heard thrown around a couple times. And so you definitely have some young players in there, whether it's young as in like 18, 19 freshmen and redshirt freshmen coming in, but also you have a handful of players that just haven't had their opportunity yet because they've been building up for that. So I would say I don't want to sit here and say that I'm worried about the linebacker room, because in reality, I think there are other positions that are bigger concerns. But I also will sit here and say that, that's a pretty deep linebacker room. Seth Wallace and Phil Parker and Kirk Ferentz know what they're doing when it comes to defense. So I feel confident enough that the linebacker room can take care of itself. I'm really intrigued to see what Cam Buffington looks like on Saturday. I'll be honest with you. I know as you just said, that's somebody that you're really intrigued about. But he's somebody I'm really interested in. Same thing, Preston Reese. I know I mentioned him already. He's somebody that I'm also really intrigued to see kind of how he looks, what he does, and how they all gel together. How does this defense continue just to gel entirely, not necessarily just a linebacker room. But yeah, the linebacker room is definitely one of the more like lesser talked about position groups, not because people aren't worried about them, maybe because there are other position groups that are taking up some more of the spotlight in this preseason.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point you make about Montgomery too, because you go from, kind of being the one of the risers on the team last year to now, all right, you've got the green dot, you're in charge of this whole thing is definitely a step up. But that'll be something I'm watching for, how he maybe just handles that. And because I think it seems like, if he can really hit the ground running and keep the momentum up that he found at the end of last year, that it's just going to raise the ceiling for maybe the entire defense.
I think so. I think one of the things that I was pleased with throughout Montgomery's season, particularly in the latter half, was just the consistency. I think he can be even more consistent. I think we saw a sample. I think his leadership and his vocal leadership was huge. It's something that has been talked about by just about everybody on that football program right now. But I think where we're really going to see him take a step forward is the on-field performance, getting the tackle numbers up if he can help it. Being that key element to Iowa's defense. That is where I think we see him. I think we saw him do some of those things and have moments where he could do that. It's getting that consistency to another level. He was a consistent presence. Now he needs to be a consistent. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
I have one final question for you, Jack, before we wrap this up. I know we've talked a lot about a bunch of stuff, but I believe that the more that we get to talk about this and introduce your perspective here, the better. But what do you think is going to be, and again, this is where quote unquote hot take buzzword can come in, but what do you think is going to be Iowa's keystone element to this season, whether it be an individual player, whether it be whoever wins this quarterback battle, whether it be a game, the Big Ten openers 3-week stretch? Yeah. Any of those, if you have your own opinion on what it could be.
That's a great question.
It's very broad, so I do apologize.
No, that's okay. Because I'm even, like you said, I do like, I am kind of one that looks at the schedule and I'm like, if some things break their way, they can. I do think, like, I look at that stretch of Big Ten games. I mean, going at Michigan, at Washington, at Minnesota, having those 3 road games, and then sandwiched in between is Ohio State as your one game at home is tough. But if you can come out of that, heck, if you can somehow go 3-1 in that stretch, that feels like a sky's the limit, maybe for the rest of the season situation. Because if you go 3-1 in that, you would think, save for Illinois, do they lose another? Should they lose another game in that? I guess it depends on who that first one loss is to. I guess that's more of an outlook of the Big Ten thing. I think you're right on I kind of go back to the defensive line. Like, I think you're spot on looking at that on Saturday. I just think that group, it feels more, at least what I've looked at so far, I think in an established culture that Iowa has, like, I trust the linebackers to kind of step up to the challenge and be that kind of deep room that they're sort of projected to be. I think the DBs will be okay, even though there's a lot to replace in the safety room. I think someone like Tyler Brown feels like a pretty safe bet for one of the newcomers. So I think that kind of leaves the defensive line in terms of like setting the identity of this being a really strong unit. Can they sort of continue to follow suit? So if it's like a keystone element, I guess I treated it more as like they have to step up for the team to maybe hit a higher level of ceiling than most are projecting. I think that's what I maybe turn to. And, we haven't talked hardly at all about the running backs. I think, someone like Kamari Moulton, can he just continue to be what he is and maybe take another step forward, take some relief off of whoever the starting quarterback is as they get established once they win the job? And, can he have sort of a career defining season and lift this team's ceiling higher on offense?
I think they're all valid points. I think they're all a part of this ongoing conversation that makes preseason fun, but also kind of like, I don't want to say anxiety inducing, but I feel like that's the only word coming to my head right now, because it just kind of emphasizes the fact that it's like, all right, we're ready to see what this looks like. We're ready to see what this team can do. We're ready to see what this fan base will bring to this program this year. And we're ready to see what the coaching staff will do with this schedule and how they'll manage a lot of these position battles. But no, I mean, I think that every point that you made is a valid argument to make. I think you could make a true case on just every single one of them on its own in some capacity.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think even, I look at some teams, every team kind of has that in the preseason. There's always a couple of spots or a schedule thing that like you look at and speculate about. But it does kind of feel like this team in particular, with having a quarterback battle, with having some sort of, they had an intriguing transfer portal haul like we talked about. Like let's roll the ball out and see. Like there are enough players on this team that, kind of your ears kind of get perked up and you're like, okay, these guys have shown they can be something. They have the potential to really raise their ceiling, or it could go the other way. Like it truly does feel like I have a lot of questions, but like in a good way. Like I just want to see it kind of start and see how this team sets the tone week 1 for how the rest of the season goes.
The itch has arrived. We're all itching to get back to watching some football.
Started out. I love, by the way, quarterbacks who lead the team in rushing. We had one at Washington who Cale Williams was their quarterback. I think had 1,300 rushing yards and like 300 passing yards. That's
there you go
down there. He's at Drake now. So
okay. There you go. Well, Jack, welcome to the beat. Thanks for joining. Looking forward to chatting with you throughout this football season, and getting to really get in the weeds here as we get going with football season.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to get in the weeds too. To the fans, like, I'll start doing my deep dives, and I'm going to learn a lot more than I know about this team right now, and I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to seeing what you're able to do as you and I get to work together this season. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys like this content, there's a newsletter that comes out for free every week on Tuesdays and Fridays. You can sign up for that at thegazette.com with the exact same name. And then obviously we will continue posting Hawk Off the Press podcast episode every week moving forward throughout the season and beyond. Thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you next time.